Let's talk about CBT, or Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, as it's called. This is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So, in this video, I want to do an in-depth analysis about what I think are the strengths and weaknesses of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. Now, CBT originated in the 1950s. There were two schools. There was Aaron Beck's CBT and Albert Ellis's REBT, or Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. Now, Aaron Beck is often called the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. Based upon the research I've done and some insider information from people who were around, I think it's likely more accurate to claim that Albert Ellis is the originator and was the earlier version of it. By the way, I have done a critique video of Albert Ellis and REBT previously on this very channel about what I think are the strengths and weaknesses of that approach. So if you just punch in provocative hypnosis and REBT, you'll get access to that video. But let's focus on Aaron Beck's specific version of it. So first of all, as to the strengths, I think that CBT was an enormous improvement at the time in terms of having a structured way of working with clients. Yes, there were genius change workers such as the late psychiatrist, psychologist, hypnosis pioneer Milton Erickson, who did amazing psychotherapy and whose work really is the foundation of a lot of what's effective in psychotherapy even today. But in terms of having a kind of structured way of working with clients, that you can transfer to other people as a system, I think CBT was the best thing around, as well as REBT. I actually prefer REBT over CBT, but anyways. So I think that was a huge improvement in the 50s. Major strength of CBT is the focus on meaning making. If you look at clients when they come in, they usually talk in such a way as to imply that outside events and circumstances are the direct source or cause of their feelings. What the genius of CBT is that it's extremely effective for a lot of people in helping them to actually see that, no, wait a minute, yes, there is this outside event, there are these life circumstances, but I also interpret them. I also give meaning. I make inferences. It's more my thinking about these circumstances that usually creates most of the suffering versus the circumstances themselves. So they have this very simple ABC model, A, activating events, B, beliefs, C, circumstances. This is something that Ellis used a lot too, where a major thing is to get people to focus on B, to awaken to the fact that, wait a minute, I am making inferences, making meaning, essentially thinking, interpreting. And I can change my story. I can change my interpretations and therefore have a quite different internal experience, even if the circumstances themselves don't necessarily change. And even when you want to change circumstances as you and you can, it's often more efficient to do so if you do so from a more grounded or cognitively flexible mindset. So this is a huge strength in CBT. Also, irrational thinking, lack of critical thinking skills often get people into trouble. So what you're doing in CBT is that you're essentially teaching people to develop more cognitive flexibility, to develop a bit more capacity to think about their thinking, to question their thinking, to dispute their thinking, to think in more rational, reasonable ways, to develop more nuance, to create greater distinctions, better boundaries, adjust expectations, look for hidden assumptions behind one's own worldview, essentially to be able to change one's story. This is extremely valuable and can be very useful in reducing what we call anxiety, depression, all sorts of psychological suffering, and also make us more resilient, as individuals. By being able to, and what CBT also does is that it offers this map of these so-called thought distortions, like black and white thinking and overgeneralizations and emotional logic, these sorts of categories. Training people to look for them, spot them, and dispute them can be extremely useful. Here's also something very interesting about that I've noticed and that Greg Lukianoff writes about in the book he co-authored with Jonathan Haidt called The Coddling of the American Mind. Greg Lukianoff is a First Amendment lawyer who obviously specializes in freedom of speech. I really, enjoy his work. And he used to struggle a lot with depression. And what he learned in CBT was extremely useful for him, was to challenge these sorts of thought distortions, such as emotional logic. So emotional logic would be, for example, using one's own emotional state in and of itself as evidence of what the other person's intentions or motives are. As in, okay, I feel angry, therefore you clearly mean to piss me off. These sorts of things. Now, the point that Lukianoff made and writes about in The Coddling of the American Mind is that if you look at today's woke ideology, critical race theory, a lot of the politically correct thinking that goes around these days, young people are essentially trained to engage in exactly the sorts of thought distortions that CBT therapists are doing their best to help their clients to dispute, challenge, and replace with more rational ways of thinking. And that this likely is one of the contributing factors to young people today depressing more, anxietizing more, psychologically suffering way more than previous generations did. So if I had my way, these sorts of skills should be taught in school as tools to help make us more intelligent in a sense, to develop more metacognition, more ability to reason and think better. Now, this is a good strength. Now, regarding the more behavioral part, then, techniques such as systematic desensitization, which was kind of codified in Britain by Joseph Wolpe, in earlier, the types of behavioral interventions where you train people to, in a systematic way, kind of confront or act against their fearful thinking, also is extremely efficient in helping people to overcome anxieties and to change their mindset. Also with people who depress, who have a lot of hopeless thinking, it can often be extremely effective to just get them to act differently, exercise, do things, act against their thinking. And as a result, the thinking itself will very often change. Another positive thing with CBT, of course, in addition to the kind of behavioral and cognitive stuff, is the emphasis on homework, being an active participant, developing actual skills. And as a result of this being a kind of streamlined approach where there's been done a lot of scientific research on CBT. CBT has kind of become the golden child of the psychotherapies. It's easy to implement in mental health systems and quite easy to do more or less valid scientific research on. So these are the strengths, in my opinion. Now, here are the weaknesses, in my opinion, and I think the weaknesses essentially are the strengths in some ways. So sometimes, people can get into trouble because they think too little. Like they don't think about their thinking. They don't think about consequences. They don't look at their own assumptions. And as a result of that, they can get into a lot of trouble. But if you look at a lot of our psychological suffering, you will see that people tend to fear their own inner experience. They mark out thoughts and feelings as if they're threatening, you know. And this is where CBT can often backfire because by giving so much emphasis to our thinking, to trying to change the content of our thinking and to dispute our thinking and to challenge our thinking, we add so much more significance and meaning to our thinking. And all that emphasis on the content of what we think and all the thinking around how we think can very often contribute to kind of strengthening this idea that our thoughts and feelings are dangerous to begin with. So I've seen this quite often with people that CBT sometimes can contribute to more rumination, to thinking looking more important and more significant. And that can even strengthen this interpretation of certain thoughts and feelings as being threatening in and of itself. So if you look at the third generation CBT, acceptance and commitment therapy and metacognitive therapy, what you'll see there is that there's less emphasis on disputing thinking and changing thinking and reframing and working with the content of thinking, but there's more emphasis on changing your relationship to your thinking. I'll say that again because it's so hyper important. There's more of an emphasis on changing your relationship to thinking, to being able to see thoughts as thoughts, especially with metacognitive therapy, the ability to leave your thoughts alone. In metacognitive therapy, there's more of an emphasis on challenging the beliefs you have about your thinking, the beliefs you have about processes such as worry and rumination. And in my experience, that is very often quite an effective upgrade. You can get more bang for the buck. So in general, there's more benefit to helping people to change their relationship to thinking and to help them more clearly see thoughts as thoughts than there is to waddle so much around in the content of their thinking. In the approach that I teach, the psychological illusion model, the emphasis is also more on helping people see the illusory nature of thought. Because once you see the illusory nature of thought, there's less temptation of thinking that you have to do anything with your thoughts. It's more about seeing thinking for what it is and seeing its illusory nature. Regarding behavioral interventions, then, traditionally in CBT, it's kind of framed as if you're afraid of something, let's say getting into an elevator, we're going to expose that and get over the fear in that sense. One very effective thing that they do in acceptance and commitment therapy is that they tend to view it more as exposure therapy on your own inner life, to become less scared of your own thoughts and feelings. And to help people do exercises where they can become more cognitively flexible, more calm, have more space around, have more perspective in relation to their inner experience before they necessarily do the exposure therapy out in the field. This is something I also tend to do, and which in general makes exposure therapy way more efficient. Um, there's also something else. Back many decades ago, there was a guy called Eugene Gendlin who did some research on psychotherapy, where he was looking at, what's the most effective method, but the clients, who are the most efficient clients. And what he identified was that the people who tended to succeed had a great ability at getting in touch with a felt sense of their issue in the office. That kind of nonverbal felt sense, connecting with the body, if you will. And this is more of a stylistic thing, but I think that the way a lot of CBT folks work can be a bit too clinical, a bit too dry, a bit too cognitive in a sense. There's sometimes a lack of artistry. Um, so, hypnosis, training in skills such as hypnosis or neurolinguistic programming, being good at helping people to connect with felt sense, connect with states, connect language to felt experience can make the change work so much more efficient. And I think this is often where a lot of the people who do CBT uh, often lack the artistry, and they lack the skill with suggestion and the skill in connecting language with experience. So it can easily become a bit too cognitive. A lot of the emphasis these days on mindfulness and meditation, this helps bridge that gap as compared to how CBT practitioners often practiced in the past. Now, the thing I mentioned previously, where I said that CBT is easily bureaucratized and it's easier to do scientific research on it because it kind of has this very coherent system of steps and things to do. I also think that this is one of the main limitations because I see clients for a living. I've done so for the last 27 years. A lot of the clients I see have been to psychologists who do CBT, and my impression is that way too many of them kind of they follow protocol because they're part of these bureaucracies where they are required to fill out their forms and work in particular ways. But what you miss there is the artistry. You miss the artistry, you miss the individual, you often miss that ability to really tailor make it to the individual. So that I think is a pretty strong limitation in how a lot of people practice CBT. And finally, one of the things that many of the spiritual traditions, if you look at teachers like Eckhart Tolle and other similar folks, what they're pointing to is the distinction between thinking and being. And that's so very important. If you can help people to discover that they're not who they think they are, that what they are is not a collection of thoughts and feelings and stories, that's enormously liberating, and that's something that acceptance and commitment therapy focuses a little bit on that. But CBT tends not to. So, anyways, but I would not say that these other methods replace CBT. I think that you should study rational emotive behavior therapy. I kind of prefer that over CBT, but you should also study CBT. It should be in your toolkit, and I think every child at school should learn these critical thinking skills. That would contribute to us all being better off collectively. So these are my thoughts. I would love to hear yours, so post them wherever you find the video. If you resonate with my thinking and you're looking to make some changes in your life and you're curious to see if you and I could be a good fit, then I invite you to reach me at provocativehypnosis.com. Send me an email. I also offer mentoring. And if you watch this in 2024 and you want to train with me live, in October, I'm doing a little seminar tour of Australia. So if you have the opportunity, I would love to see you there. You can check out the information at the seminar page at provocativehypnosis.com. As always, thanks for listening.